Now it's time to bring back my co-host, Jeff Small, along with our guest, FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly, who was confirmed unanimously for a seat on the commission back in 2013. Commissioner, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I know you're really, really good at what you do. Do you know how I know that?
No.
Because you're a Republican, and somehow you got appointed during the Obama administration. So you were the token Republican to get appointed then. That means you must be really good at what you do.
Well, we have a unique structure by statute. The majority party gets 3 seats and the minority gets 2. So it's a kind of, I've always been a Republican, so option at the time.
Oh, I see. There you go. All right. Well, that makes sense then. That was my biggest burning question. Other than, how has your job changed over the last 4 months with more and more communication now being over the internet or social media? I mean, tell us kind of big picture how it's changed.
Well, look, the pandemic has changed everyone's experience. It's certainly changed my personal life. I'm in my home, actually, my dining room. I just put my daughter down and spending a ton of time on daycare instead of, farming it out to somebody else. So it's changed my personal life. But work-wise, the commission is still moving forward on its important mission, but the priorities have slightly, been highlighted. We recognize the importance of broadband long before we get into the pandemic, but those things are even more important now. Making sure that everyone has access is much more important and timely, and both on the business side and on the individual side. So our work is just as important as it's ever been. But we're just now scattered throughout the Washington, D.C. area.
But I mean, how has it changed in terms of, for example, the internet, the increased use of the internet, the increased marketing now? Even myself, we used to do workshops for potential clients to educate them about financial matters, and we did it physically. And now we find ourselves doing it via the internet. So how's your role changed now with that part of the world changing?
Well, look, I'm doing, 5-6 meetings, virtual speaking events a week. I may have traveled the country in at least 3 times a month. Now I'm not doing any travel. And now I'm able to speak at conferences wherever they may be, and pipe myself into places around the world. So more active, more aggressive. The technology really improves the communication. I'm doing Zoom calls as everyone else is, a dozen times a day, depending on the.
But Commissioner, has that caused the FCC to look even more closely, more deeply at internet communications, or not?
We are following very closely what's the traffic pattern, for instance, and where things have changed because of the pandemic. Has traffic, it's certainly migrated from the urban centers, and we're seeing the patterns more to suburbia and where people are in need more bandwidth, and where they have higher needs for communication tools and technology. And so we're seeing that everywhere, and we're going to have to see if that's the new normal.
Mm-hmm. I want to hear a little bit about how these changes have affected the FCC in terms of and how they regulate, social media. But I need to leave that to Jeff because I know nothing about social media. So Jeff, help me out here.
So Commissioner O'Reilly, this is a very emotionally charged topic that I'm going to bring up to you, but the First Amendment allows social media companies to censor free speech, and the government or the FCC can't retaliate against that free speech, even though internet companies like YouTube or Facebook, they can actually curtail information that's out there that like maybe the president's putting out there. So can you explain to the general public and our viewer and our listenership why that is permissible and what that issue is?
Sure. Well, there's 2 parts. One, it's a statutory provision commonly known as Section 230 of the Communications Act, and that provides liability protections for the platforms you just spoke about in terms of how they deal with their users and the material that they may be posted and what their exposure point is for their moderation of traffic on their networks. The second is the underlying First Amendment. What protections do users have and the networks that they have? And Congress kind of short-circuited some of the court battles we'd have with the First Amendment by establishing this 230 protection. And that has generated considerable debate in Washington, D.C., whether the protections that we have afforded those platforms are too expansive. Are they abusing their privileges? Are they taking advantage of the legislation and the provisions for purposes of harming the speech of a number of actors, including conservatives who like to use their platforms? And that's something that the president has spoke about. A number of folks on Capitol Hill have talked about. And should the statute be changed, or should it be left alone? And that's something that is under the purview. It may come to the FCC, but it also is something that Congress is debating right now.
Technology companies trying to put a muzzle on conservatives? I can't imagine that would happen. That just doesn't sound right to me. We need to take a commercial break. We'll talk more about that, though, coming up in just a minute. And you stay with us. We'll be back here in a moment on the income generation. We'll be right back. Now let's bring back my good friend and co-host Jeff Small, along with our special guest, FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly. Commissioner, thanks for sticking around.
So go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to hand it to you. You're on a roll there with the social media, something of which I know nothing.
So, Commissioner Riley, what I want to know next really about is the dynamic between the FCC and the analytics and the metrics that the Googles of the world utilize to what I would call algorithmically manipulate search engine criteria to lean in a specific direction. Does the FCC have any oversight or provide any directive on those issues? And if they do, are we monitoring that right now? Because I see things on platforms, on international platforms, that I don't see on Americanized platforms. And it almost feels like somebody is massaging that information and what they want us to see. It's being pre-programmed.
Well, our role is somewhat limited here. We are exploring whether we have more of a say in the matter. It may be something that Congress gives us even more latitude to take action. But your point is well taken. I certainly get the same experience when I both domestically and internationally, and what I see on the platforms. It does, and I've certainly heard that from consistent voice. Certainly, many conservatives have raised that with me, that the experience and the manipulation from the algorithms are really problematic. It's something we need to explore, whether it's done by my agency or otherwise. It needs to be looked at.
No, I completely agree. Dave, what do you got?
Yeah, and if, of course, this is the FCC here in the United States, I guess if this were the FCC in China, you just have, your job would be easy. You'd have one rubber stamp and you just stamp everything and make it easy. But because we're that's right. And when it comes out of the government, your job is to stamp it and pass it on. So what is the one biggest change, maybe the one biggest thing that the FCC has now started to increase their focus on since this COVID-19 pandemic?
Look, it's two parts. It is having broadband to consumers, and then is making sure that our networks are reliable and able to handle the traffic patterns that we're dealing with. And I would say in a bigger perspective is how do we make sure the networks going forward, which are probably going to be a more wireless reliant, how do we make sure that those are built in a timely manner? How do we make sure we have the resources and the infrastructure to have those networks compete going forward? So it's all about taking this experience and making sure that it's replicated going forward, that it's not demurred going forward, that it's available to the fullest extent to the Americans.
So, Commissioner Riley, do we have a 5G schedule in place? And if we do you know what that is for implementation?
Sure. We don't exactly have a 5G schedule. What we have is, the government's job is to create the environment, make sure that the companies are not hamstrung in their ability to make 5G available. And our wireless providers, commercial entities, are pushing forward on a very aggressive schedule to bring 5G throughout America. It's likely to hit the urban markets and already is before it hits suburbia and then to rural America. But we are just as concerned about making sure that 5G hits rural America and is available as everywhere else. So it is not something lost on us. But in terms of a schedule, it's probably a 3 to 5 year build. Is what I've been looking at in terms of what we can expect. We have a number of resources, financial resources the FCC will put into the place to make sure this happens. But it's going to be really exciting when it does, because the opportunities available from 5G are really impressive. The use cases are really going to change the dynamics that the American experience.
Yeah, I actually can't wait for that because virtually everything I do is off my phone or my iPad, where literally, I mean, I could function completely with that almost, and that's going to make a big, big difference. So what do you see moving forward? Okay, if there's another area that potentially might come under the FCC's purview that maybe isn't now, or but it's kind of sort of on the horizon, what might that be?
Yeah, we have a number of satellite companies that are setting up constellations, huge constellations to serve the entire globe and bring low cost broadband and other services to Americans and global users. And that is something that we're on the infancy of. But in the next 3 to 5 years, I think the timing's about right. We're going to see some really changes in terms of the cost of broadband and the availability, and solve those issues about rural connectivity. So I'm really excited on what satellite services may be able to develop. We've got a handful of plans. We'll see if any of them, which of those are successful and which ones of those fail by the market side.
So which one of you, are you going to be the first one to volunteer then to take a trip to that satellite vis-a-vis Elon Musk, or are you going to pass the buck to somebody else?
I'll pass the buck. I've seen those the launches myself, but they send them up. Elon sends them up at 60 at a time. He's getting ready to have his fleet ready by the end of the year is the goal, from my understanding.
Yeah, and even it's kind of funny because even though I'm a pilot, the thought about going up in a rocket ship is just a little bit past my comfort zone, I have to admit. So, Commissioner, it's been wonderful having you on the show today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so very much.
And you stay with us too. We have much more to come right here on The Income Generation in just a moment. We'll be right back.